Ash, welcome to the programme. Do you think, first of all, that it's right that there is this sudden focus and even taking off air of old TV programmes and old movies that have these racist elements?
What I would say is that it's always welcome when we revisit popular culture and ask questions of it and interrogate it, because that's how we achieve societal progress. It's not by keeping things the same and preserving it in aspect. It's about asking those difficult questions. However, this hasn't been a demand of the Black Lives Matter movement in the UK. I've been covering these protests since they began. Not one placard, not one chant, not one T-shirt mentioned any of these sitcoms. And so what we've ended up with is institutions which are still very much white dominated, demonstrating their inability to properly engage with the broader aims of this movement. They react in a panicky way. And our media culture, which is just obsessed with talking about itself, jumps on these stories at the expense of the issues which the activists are wanting to talk about.
Right. So how do you think these institutions should be reacting? Should they be looking not at, say, whatever programme they should take off air or what should stay on air, but be more committed to, say, hiring more black staff?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the British media landscape, it is about 91% white. It is not representative of a modern, diverse Britain. And that homogeneity is then reflected in editorial decisions. And it's not just about race, it is also about class. It's dominated by privately educated people. And I would much rather, lots of these leading media players, whether it's BBC or whether it's Sky, whether it's Netflix, or whether it's any other platform, saying, OK, what we're actually going to do is look at our hiring practices, look at what we commission and diversify it like that, rather than opening up a new front in what is, quite frankly, the most boring culture war ever.
But perhaps it should be a focus of the culture element of this, should be a focus of Black Lives Matter, because there is a very real debate in culture, isn't there, about, because culture reflects life after all, about what is acceptable. If you look at Gone with the Wind, which sentimentalizes racism and slavery, and then you've got Fawlty Towers, which makes a mockery of racism. They're two kind of different entities, aren't they? And it's got to be analysed, isn't it?
Well, I agree with you. It certainly should be analysed and recontextualised. The thing about Fawlty Towers, for instance, is that racist rant which Major Gowan goes on, it'd been edited out of most of the repeats for years. And it was only when UK TV took down that particular episode so they could do the same thing again that, there was this furore which was completely confected. So I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about these things at all, but we should ask ourselves why, in particular, establishment media outlets are much more comfortable talking about those issues rather than things like the way black people are overrepresented when it comes to the prison system, or black people are 8 times more likely to have a taser discharged on them by British police forces. These are much more difficult questions. And, everyone would prefer to talk about, is Fawlty Towers racist or not? People don't want to talk about our prison system.
Right, and if moving away from the TV and the film element of things, we've also been focusing on monuments, and we've been talking about Winston Churchill's statue being boarded up ahead of these riots or the protests that are taking place today, I should say. What do you make of that?
Well, put it this way, I come from a Bengali heritage, and every time I try and talk about the Bengal famine and Winston Churchill's role in it, I find myself forced into having to talk about World War II and the achievements of Great Britain during that time. But every time someone talks about World War II, they're not forced into the position of having to talk about the famine. And what that reflects is that we have a very, very narrow way of understanding history, in which the activities of some of these figures, whether it's Winston Churchill or whether it's someone like, Edward Colston, that it's whitewashed, and we tend to memorialise certain figures in order so we can forget some of the things that they really did. And it speaks to, I think, the poverty of the curriculum in this country, and that the experiences of formerly colonised people has not been adequately reflected in our education system, or indeed popular culture at large. I grew up thinking that Winston Churchill was like the nation's jowly granddad, even though I was brought up at home knowing what the famine was.
Right, but it's right that this statue should be protected in case of damage from protests, isn't it?
Well, Well, I remember a May Day protest. This was, well over 10 years ago now, where Winston Churchill's statue was defaced. It had a Mohican placed on it and it had graffiti all around the base. And that wasn't seen as a huge culture wars issue. These statues have been boarded up before. The Million Mask March, Occupy movement, when Brian Hoare protested in Parliament Square. And again, it wasn't seen as a huge issue. Now, the reason why it's being seen as a huge issue now is because it's trying to present Black Lives Matter as this thing which is going to take down and destroy everything we hold dear about the national story, rather than asking really pertinent questions about our history. So again, we might want to think about why we focus on these instances of the statues being boarded up in this way when we haven't done that before.
Ash, great to talk to you. Good to get your perspective. We do appreciate that. Ash Sarkar from Novara Media. Thanks a lot.